And here to talk about all of those injuries, including Breece Hall, we do want to bring in our NFL insider, Josina Anderson. So, Josina, we just heard Breece Hall torn ACL. He is out for the season. Initial reactions to that news for Breece Hall. I mean, he was off to a great start.
Well, I think when you hear quiet, which is really nothing at all for a long time, it's almost kind of another way of confirmation of what you already suspect. And it's very rare that when the initial assessment on a player is an ACL injury, that it doesn't end up being an ACL injury, particularly when they can do a manual test on the field to sort of get that initial indicator, which most times ends up being that. Usually what you're trying to determine is if there is additional damage to the ACL once that initial assessment is done. And in this case, getting a text from a league source that in addition to having that ACL injury, that Breece Hall has some damage that the source is calling minor to the meniscus. But nonetheless, after conducting the MRI, that is the full picture. So the good news is that the Jets are 5-2, but even in that accomplishment, particularly for teams in the New York, New Jersey area, going back to yesterday, I was hearing, a somber tone out of, the sources that I typically talk to. And that really is just the full recognition of, the talent that Breece Hall, what he was showing in his short bursts and his full kind of, talent skill set on this team already. So they will have to go and move forward with Michael Carter, who had 13 carries for 29 rush yards. In this past game, is their fourth rounder out of North Carolina, has been with the Jets 2 seasons, did have 639 rush yards and 4 touchdowns in that rookie season. So you did see somewhat of a burst out of Michael Carter and a few opportunities that he did get after Hall went down. And that's the way that they're going to have to continue to go without him.
And Josina, you talked about Michael Carter. How confident do you think they are in him and his performance moving forward?
I mean, he's someone that can do it. He's obviously was able to accumulate over 600 rush yards from a rookie perspective. So the talent is there. I think the extra dynamic ability that you get with Breece Hall is the fact that he runs a 4.3 40. So you saw that speed on one of those initial, outbursts that he had at the beginning of the game and just throughout this season, where you can see that speed does count. It does matter when the defensive backs or the other team's opposing defense is chasing you down. It doesn't mean that they cannot be productive with Michael Carter. He can do it. It's just that he in and of himself will have to take it to another level, and they will have to continue to work their depth around him.
And Josina, I want to talk about some other injuries that we mentioned off of the top of the show. DK Metcalf, Antoine Winfield, a lot of injuries that are happening, and that happens in the NFL, but it just seems like in week 7, a lot of big names going down, impacting a lot of teams, a lot of positions all across the board.
Well, one of the other big ones that were in addition to the list that you mentioned is waiting for Evan Neal right away after that. And that's the tackle for the Giants, who was 7th overall pick this past draft. And that's a big deal to a quarterback who obviously is trying to continue to show himself. And I know we'll talk more about Daniel Jones. But that's a big deal from the protection standpoint, and particularly when you're looking at how the improvements that he's been making in terms of protecting the ball. Right away, I did hear that it was an MCL injury, and the source had said at the time that we're just waiting to hear the extent of it, how serious it is. Is it a grade 2? Is it a little bit more than a grade 2? And, for people out there who are listening, you're trying to figure out basically everything is always a tear, even if it's a sprain. You're basically trying to figure out how much of on the degree radiant, how much of it is from a micro to a macro standpoint. And obviously a macro being that there's more of an actual ripping as opposed to, tears more so on the tissue level, so to speak. So that's what we're really trying to figure out from Evan Neal. And the reason why that's important is because we'll obviously get an idea of how long he's going to be out. So the initial thought as of right now is that it was not season ending, but of course we're waiting for official confirmation. And as for the other injuries that you mentioned, when it comes to DK Metcalf, he did have the initial x-ray scans, which is typically what you can do from a game site to know that those are negative, but the MRI is what's going to be more conclusive relative to ligament damage. So we are waiting to hear on that. And those are happening with players on the West Coast, which is why it takes longer.
And Josina, now kind of switching gears, talking about some guys having some breakout season, starting off with the Raiders, Josh Jacobs. Jacobs, 143 yards, 3 touchdowns in Sunday's win over the Texans, back-to-back games with 140-plus rushing yards. Now, we know the Raiders declined his 5th-year option. I mean, what do you think happens to Josh Jacobs here in the postseason, or on the postseason, the free agency, I should say? How much of a case is he making for himself as he goes into free agency?
So I was just going to read you a couple of texts that I got from a Raider source this morning on the situation with Josh Jacobs. And one of the things that they said about him is that he's the best player on the team. They include that with him and also Davante Adams, who they obviously feel, can, continue to come along. And for this particular source, and I'll contextualize it to say it's not a decision-making source, but somebody, relative to the team, saying that they feel it would be a no-brainer to go ahead and extend him. You mentioned that they did not opt to give him the 5th-year option. In the last 3 games, he's been averaging over 140 yards. But then this source said that Josh Jacobs averaging 140 plus equals wins, and that they feel like their passing game runs off of their run game. And so this is what you need. And that's why it breaks down, and that they should be continuing to go with the 20 plus carries that he's been getting in the last 3 games, which has obviously contributed to upping the rushing production. One of the options that the team could do here is to, one, approach him with a multi-year deal before he hits free agency. The issue with that, as I was talking to a source this morning, is that they're already, paying Davante Adams, they're paying Hunter Renfrow, and they have the highest paid tight end in the league. So that would be another position that you would be paying a skill player on offense to do that. And they would have to decide if that's the balance of what they want to do. The other thing would be to franchise tag him, which essentially would guarantee that you would have him for at least another year, because the likelihood that another team matching on that would require 2 first-rounders, which is typically what does not happen because no team is giving 2 first-rounders for a tag player. So that's why in that situation, sometimes teams can opt to do a sign-and trade, which is what the Packers did with Davante Adams last season by tagging him and then conducting a sign and trade that ended up having Davante Adams leave from Green Bay and going to the Raiders. So it just depends really on how you quantify the value of the running back. When you look at Josh McDaniels and teams with the Patriots historically, they have done it by running back committee. So it will be interesting to see what the Raiders opt to do based on how they value the position. But if he goes into free agency, when you're looking at the running back market right now, with Christian McCaffrey having the highest average at 16, and then players like Ezekiel Elliott and Dalvin Cook after that with 15 or what have you, how much could he go up from being on a 4-year, $11 million deal, a 4-year, $11 million deal off his rookie contract? And the franchise tag probably going to land him around 10 million if they opt to do that, relative to what he could get in free agency when you look at the top of the market being at 16 right now and how he could do. So I would think Josh Jacobs would like to test free agency if it continues to go the way that it is right now. We'll see how the Raiders value the position relative to his production and if it keeps going.
And Josina, getting back to the Giants, want to talk about another guy with a breakout season, Daniel Jones. Giants now 6-1 after beating the Jags. We know that Jones got his 5th game-winning drive of this season. So what does free agency look like for him?
Well, the big question is, will the Giants allow Daniel Jones to go into free agency? Obviously, right now, everything is going great. The team is 6-1. He is, I would say, for a lot of people, performing beyond what they thought, although that is a large part and testament to Brian Daboll and the juice that he's brought from Buffalo, the offensive know-how, how Daniel Jones has improved in terms of protecting the ball. I mean, when you go from a league-high 19 fumbles in 2019 to just having 2 right now and a 6 touchdown to 2 interception, touchdown to interception ratio, you can see the improvement in how he's thriving. The question is that enough? Is that enough for the Giants to keep Daniel Jones when you consider the fact that the more that they win, right? Obviously, they're going to be further and further away from a high draft pick. And what are the options and likelihood of grabbing a quarterback via free agency, one that you would want and one that you value. So a lot of different things to consider. I was talking to a league source this morning just to try to get their perspective. And it was just, conjecture on their part. But one of the things that they said was that the Giants may opt to allow him to test free agency, and maybe calculating that after testing free agency, he would end up or would want to come back.
All right, and Jones finishing 19 of 30 with 202 yards, 1 TD, no interceptions against the Jags. That is our NFL insider, Josina Anderson, a wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much, Josina. And for more NFL news and updates, make sure that you watch Inside the NFL. That is streaming exclusively on Paramount+. New episodes dropping every Tuesday with commentary and analysis.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.